Professor Fuentes sets out his own view.
Consciousness has to be considered an emergent property. So you can sort of dull it by damaging parts of the brain or parts of the body. But with a fully sort of functioning consciousness, you can't pin it down to one place or one process. And I think that's part of the magic and science of it, right? Both simultaneously, that we know there are all these components to it, but it doesn't reside in one specific material location. And I think that's very important, particularly when it comes to thinking about engaging with mental health, engaging with physical trauma, mental trauma, things like that, to always recognize that it's not just about a broken car model of fixing things. You can't just fix one part of our biology and fix the entire thing. There's a lot more going on.
An idea that is rapidly gaining ground among many theorists of consciousness across many different methodological models is welcomed by some as a possible way to resolve the hard problem of consciousness. This idea seems to offer a compromise between physical reductionism on one hand and dualism on the other. Neuroscientists can look at parts of the brain that are active when we're conscious. These are the so-called neurocorrelates of consciousness, but they still cannot actually pinpoint subjective experience. This gap leads some to support the theory of panpsychism. This idea is that consciousness is a fundamental property of matter. Professor Goff explains.
I adopt a view that consciousness goes all the way down to the fundamental building blocks of physical reality. Fundamental particles like electrons and quarks. Well, according to panpsychism, then, electrons and quarks have very, very simple forms of conscious experience. And the very complex experience of the human or animal brain is somehow built up from these more rudimentary forms of consciousness at the level of fundamental physics. So consciousness has been there all along. It was there in the beginning, but in the beginning, consciousness existed in very simple forms, and millions of years of evolution have molded it into the wonderful kind of experiences we human beings enjoy today.
On that view, consciousness is both a fundamental property of the universe and something that arises within the brain. It's important to point out that none of these theories can be wholly proven. There remain significant gaps in both measuring and explaining consciousness within every theoretical approach. Professor Peters argues that the approaches she favors are useful methodologically, and she critiques theories that are not testable using the empirical methods of bioscience, even if they may ultimately turn out to be true.
I think that the physicalist, reductionist approach, the computational functionalist approach, even as a narrower version of that, it gives us something to hang on to. You know, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. And to say that the universe is infused with consciousness, or that consciousness is this particular causal structure of interacting elements, or that dualism is a thing, all of those are extraordinary claims, and they very well might be true, but I don't know how to even go about finding evidence of those. We have consciousness, we know that. Why do we have it, and why do we think that we have it? Well, we have brains, and those seem to be important for our survival. And the things that seem to behave very differently from us, like plants, don't have brains. Okay, so maybe brains are a reasonable explanation for this.
We have heard quite a few theories about consciousness and gotten some sense of how contested this terrain is. Now let's turn to a question that must be on your minds and eventually might even replace them, at least in some dystopian predictions. Can AI tools and technologies replicate or produce consciousness?
One of the areas that I'm fielding most questions in is AI, right? Artificial intelligence. Can AI become like the human mind? And my response pretty much uniformly is no, for a couple reasons. One, AI is programmed machines, and human minds are not machines. So I think at one level, we're ahead of ourselves if we think that algorithmic processes, even incredibly adaptive learning algorithmic processes like we see in contemporary AI, will get to sort of do things the way humans do. However, what is amazing is that we're putting more and more information into these AIs. And what we're able to do then, I think, is create these massive information machines, but they don't think. They process, they compare, they engage. They don't imagine the way humans do. And so I don't think we're going to create a machine that thinks like a human.
Professor Peters disagrees. If we can produce self-reflection, or metacognition, as she calls it, using computational processes, why can't AI?
Metacognition, I don't see as beyond AI capacities even right now. It's just people aren't doing it right. I think part of the reason that we haven't built it into artificial intelligence systems yet is that we don't really know how it works in us. But we do know that to the extent that there is something like metacognition being built into AI systems, that it doesn't work at all like ours does. And part of that is that we don't know exactly how ours works. That's what our group is trying to do, is reverse engineer how that's working.
Some of the things we do can be done, perhaps even better, by artificial intelligence, but not all of them. Science fiction films, such as Star Wars, sometimes portray the droids as more human than the humans themselves.
We seem to be made to suffer. It's our lot in life. Where do you think you're going? Well, I'm not going that way. Don't get technical with me. I've just about had enough of you. Go that way. You'll be malfunctioning within a day, you nearsighted scrap pile.
Professor Fuentes says that there are still capacities that are uniquely human. Capacities that set humans apart from other intelligent life forms, or even droids.
I think one of the most important capacities is the human capacity for belief. That is, humans are able to take all of their lived experience, their input, their visual input, their social input, what they know, what they feel, and they're able to derive or to build ideas, concepts, and they're able to insert themselves wholly and fully, to fall in love with an idea, right, or a perception, and commit to it so that it becomes their reality. That capacity is very, very powerful for our bodies, for our minds, and for our societies. So belief, which is tied into imagination, to creativity, but also to the sort of sense of transcendence, or the knowing that there's more than just the material in human lives. All of those things come together and I think have to be considered when we talk about what does it mean to be human.